Let's switch this up.
Hello, my name is Brendan Corionis, and I am Mrs. Doherty, Muncie Central High School art teacher's e-learning practicum teacher for the end of the school year. If you're in Mrs. Doherty's art class and you haven't seen my other video already, what are you doing here? Go do that on Flipgrid. If you're new here and not from Mrs. Doherty's class at all, welcome to my own personal prison of isolation, where my only solace is making art lessons for kids and having Zoom meetings on a weekly basis. Speaking of prison, while I was taking a tour at the David Siqueiros Museum of Art on Ball State's campus, I got to look at a room full of work by famous Mexican artists, or work that was inspired by famous Mexican artists. While looking at this room, I noticed a series of small prints on the wall. As we walked by them, the museum director explained to us that these were by Diego Rivera himself, the famous Mexican muralist, and that he made these prints while he was in prison for participating in a pro-communist strike. Like you do. He made these prints by having his friends sneak him in pieces of wood that he would then carve and sneak back out to have printed. If you're familiar with the woodblock printmaking process, that means after these blocks were snuck out, they could make hundreds of these prints if they wanted to. And as I was there listening to the museum director, it struck me that this famous muralist still managed to make art while in prison. He still found a way. At present, art supplies are limited. Many of us have few to none of the traditional art materials that we're used to using in class. Materials like graphite and charcoal pencils or drawing paper, paints and canvases, they're all hard to come by. And this puts a lot of constraints on us as art students, myself included. But if Diego Rivera can find a way to make artworks in prison, then we can find a way to make artworks at home. And that's what we're going to explore in this lesson. Now that TikTok that I was watching in the beginning was made by a good friend of mine, Jenny Schellebarger, who was also an art teacher in training. But just like Diego Rivera, her TikTok got me thinking. She was using a traditional art medium, paint, on a non-traditional art surface, her jeans. And when you get right down to it, all you really need to make a 2D artwork is just that, a surface and a medium. Media simply means how art materials get onto a surface. So more traditionally, you can think of charcoal pencil, graphite pencil, maybe sometimes drawing markers, but it can also be more non-traditional. I could make an artwork using a highlighter or a paint marker or any number of other things. As long as they make a mark and leave a trace, that's all that matters. Now when you have a medium, you have to apply it to a surface, such as a sketchbook or a canvas. But as I noted before, you don't always have to stick with traditional media. You can make an artwork on a sticky note if you wanted to. It'll hold graphite, marker, and any number of other things. Why not? Depending on the medium, sometimes you don't even need a surface at all. The longer you leave pancake mix on the stove, the browner it turns. You may have seen some videos online recently of artists using this to make really cool stuff using only pancake mix and the stove. All right, I hope this goes well. As I sit down to eat my monstrosity, the interesting thing about these different media is that each of them have their own unique and different properties, or the unique challenges that they pose to an artist who tries to use them, or the unique way they appear or behave as an artwork. And an artist who does their job well, like those pancake artists that you see on Instagram or TikTok, will experiment with the art materials that they choose to use so that they're familiar with these properties and how to use them well. For example, I was not very familiar with making pancakes in general or making pancake art, so my smiley face ended up a little bit more sad than I wanted it to. Now, if I wanted to make pancake art, I certainly could, but it would take more experimentation and getting myself familiar with how to use the pancake mix. For your assignment, you're going to have to think outside the box. I want you to choose a non-traditional art material, or an art material that you wouldn't normally think to use in a classroom or as an artist. You can choose either a medium or a surface, or if you really want to challenge yourself, you can do both. The first part of this assignment will be to experiment with your medium, getting used to its properties so you know how to use it in your final artwork. I'm going to walk you through this process and what each step will look like by showing you my own example, hopefully a better one than the pancakes. The first step, of course, is to choose your art material. As I was brainstorming this project, I took a walk with Mrs. Doherty at a social distance of 6 or more feet, and we found some pieces of charcoal that were tossed in front of somebody's apartment on the sidewalk. And while charcoal is a normal art medium, using bits of charcoal like this is not something you typically expect to do. So I figured since I don't have sidewalk chalk, and it's a decent enough day outside, I can use this to make drawings on my sidewalk outside my apartment. This would be using a non-traditional medium on a non-traditional surface. And it looks like this guy already did it. So we'll have to choose something else. Well, now I'm going to find some examples of non-traditional media and non-traditional surfaces. And I'm going to show you what the first step of your assignment, due on Wednesday, May 6th, will look like. I'll also show you some other examples of myself experimenting with media, so you get an idea of what I want you to be thinking about while you're doing this assignment. Okay, in my more non-traditional media corner, I still have that actual charcoal piece, which I may use. I have some Expo markers, I have colored Sharpies, different colored pens, highlighters, which could be a lot of fun. I have a paint marker, and I also have some brush-on whiteout, which I could use on a colored surface. I have newspaper, a blank plastic bag, some old brown packing paper, cardboard, of course. I could do a drawing on a piece of wood. I have a blank clear glass that I could draw on the outside of with maybe a marker or something. And I also have toilet paper. The first part of your assignment, which will be due Wednesday, May 6th, will be to do some experimenting to learn the properties of your medium. I'd like you to try at least 2 of the art exercises listed here. These are art exercises that you've probably done before in learning to use charcoal or graphite or paint on paper or canvas. And they can be used here as well to learn the properties of your medium and surface of choice and how they interact with one another. So I'd like you to choose at least 2 of these exercises and do some experimenting with them. As you experiment, I'd like you to take notes on the properties of the non-traditional media or surface that you chose to work with. You can use the following questions as starting points. Does the medium show up transparent or opaque? As the medium goes across the surface, does the texture of the surface show through? Is it smooth or rough? Is the medium wet or dry? If the medium is wet, does the surface let it soak through? How much media do you have to apply before the surface lets it soak through? What happens if you wipe the surface with your fingers or a towel after you apply a medium? Does it smudge? Does the media easily rub off of the surface? What kind of mark does the medium make if you barely let it touch the surface? Can you erase it all? What happens if you try? How well does the media show up on the surface? How does the color affect how the media shows up on the surface? I'm going to be doing my example with highlighters, so I'm going to use a traditional surface, regular white paper, to draw on. See, this is what experimenting is for. If I have thought of this before, I would probably use this pink over here instead of over here, because you get a nice kind of dark purple. Okay, so what I learned from this sphere making exercise is, so obviously highlighter is transparent, and I've noticed that it actually kind of acts like watercolor, because you can layer it. You can get, say, this pink through this orange, and they make a different color when they interact. Of course, highlighter uses ink, so it's a wet medium, but it doesn't seem to smudge or rub very much when it's used on paper. But when you apply a lot of it in one place, you can kind of feel it pool in there, and it definitely soaks through the paper a little bit. So exercise number 2, I'm going to try to make a cube. Highlighters introduce some interesting ideas because when you're using different colors of them, you have to choose where to use those colors and how to let them interact if you let them interact at all. For example, here I haven't let them interact very much, but I could. But as you can see, I've chosen to use darker blue and green on the sides of the cube, where it would be a little bit darker if my light is coming from the top. But something I want to try is layering it again. Okay, so by drawing the cube, I got to learn a little bit more about how the highlighter interacts with itself and how I can use it to make different interesting color combinations. So for making a gradient, you can make it in a number of different ways. With highlighters, I have a couple of different colors, so I can make a gradient from, say, green to blue. If I only have one color, then I can just go gradient from one solid color to whatever the color of my surface is. So from pink to white. So what I've learned here is that highlighter is very much one color. It doesn't do a lot of blending into itself, and you can't do a lot of shading with it. But you can apply some shading by not layering the lines so thick together. So since I've learned that highlighter likes to stay the same color that it is, and that you can't really change how light or dark it is as you put it down, it's a very good candidate for the line exercise. So what I've learned here is that with highlighters, you can get one very solid, thick line. You can get one very solid, thin line. You can also change how thick or thin the line is that the highlighter puts down by changing the angle or how hard you press down with the highlighter. So give at least 2 of these exercises a try using the art material that you chose, and take some notes on the properties that you discover, either based on just what you learned about your medium or those questions that I suggested you use earlier. As I mentioned earlier, I'd like you to have done this by May 6th, and I'd like you to submit a video to Flipgrid that shows us what exercises you did and where you explain what you learned from those exercises. So now I'll do a little montage for you, doing these same exercises with some of my other non-traditional art media and other non-traditional art surfaces. So once you've done your exercises and taken notes on the properties of the non-traditional art media that you chose, you're ready to get thinking about what your project will actually be of. This project is more about learning to use the tools that you've experimented with, and less about what subject matter you choose. For that reason, I just want you to choose an object or animal to draw a picture of, or even a person to draw a portrait of. This doesn't need to have spatial depth. You can simply draw it in the middle of your surface. You can look at a physical object to draw in front of you, or you can find a picture, whether that's from a book, magazine, or online. But as you choose what you're going to draw, only you know A, what you're capable of as an artist, and B, what the materials that you chosen can do. So I want you to choose something that will be a challenge for you, but that works well with the media or surface that you chose. For my drawing with highlighters, I think I'm going to choose some birds of paradise, which are known for being very bright and which stand out. By Friday, May 8th, I'd like you to have uploaded a video to the Flipgrid, either showing us your source or explaining to us what you plan to draw. I'd also like you to tell us why you chose that and how you can use your art materials of choice to make a good drawing of it. As far as size, that's really up to you. If you chose a non-traditional surface, you're going to be limited by what you have. If you chose a non-traditional medium, like highlighters, I'd suggest something about the size of a piece of printer paper again. So here are the video requirements that I'd like you to upload by Friday, May 8th. Just like the last project, that entire week after of the 11th through the 15th will be for you to work on your project, and I'd like you to upload a Flipgrid video showing us your project by the 15th. Now I'm going to get working on my examples. So here's my reference image that I'm using. I'm kind of a dinosaur nerd, so I'm going to do a picture of this Archaeopteryx, and I'm going to try and use these colors in an interesting way I can. Okay, so this is the result of my highlighter drawing. Well, you can see where I've used the things that I learned through my practice. You can see that I've learned to use the layering effect that highlighter has. I don't have a purple highlighter, but that pink over blue produces that nice purple that I really like and enjoy. I've also tried to make use of the linear quality of the highlighter. I've accepted the fact that I can't get a lot of different tones, so I've used the white space as the lightest lights. On the log down here, I've chosen to use orange on top to show it's being hit by the sun more than this blue on the bottom, which represents more of a shadow. So now I'm going to move on to one that's using not only non-traditional media, but a non-traditional surface. Charcoal brick on wood. I own a guitar. I can't play guitar, but I own one. Okay, so remembering the charcoal that I was using is not exactly meant for drawing. Here's what I ended up with. I'm not unhappy, but that's one of the things you need to remember, that the materials that you're probably going to be using probably weren't meant to be drawn with, and so this charcoal proved really hard to control. Even if you end up with something that you're not totally happy with, I'm not totally satisfied with how this ended up. But the thing is, you work through those problems that the new media presented, and that's a learning experience. So now you have two different examples of two different ways you could take this project. On Friday the 15th, I'd like you to have uploaded a video showing us your project and also telling us what challenges you faced, what you're happy with, and what you've learned. You might get frustrated with this project. Good. It's frustrating to learn to use new tools, especially when they're not designed to do what you're trying to do with them. But by solving those problems, you're learning to think in new ways, and I hope those new ways of thinking stick with you in future projects. So the three components of the project: on Monday the 4th, you'll be watching this video and getting started thinking about it. By Wednesday the 6th, I'd like you to have uploaded your experiment video, showing us which of the two exercises you chose to do, and telling us a bit about what you learned about your non-traditional art material of choice. By Friday the 8th, I'd like you to have decided on what you're going to draw. Remember, this project is all about teaching yourself how to use non-traditional art materials. So choose subject matter that is challenging for you, but that you can still do with the materials you chose. And then you have the entirety of the week of the 11th through the 15th to do your project. On that Friday, I'd like you to upload a video showing us what you made, telling us a bit about the challenges you faced, and telling us what you've learned. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Mrs. Doherty or myself. My email is listed below. And I look forward to seeing where you take this project. Good luck, stay healthy, peace.